Hi, everyone, and welcome to Valley of Depth. I'm your host, Mo Islam. Today's guest is someone I've had the privilege of sitting down with before, Tyler Bernstein, co-founder and CEO of Zeno Power. The first time Tyler joined me, Zeno was just emerging from its early startup days. Fast forward to today, and the company has raised $70 million in venture capital, secured more than $60 million in anchor contracts with NASA and the DoD, and built and demonstrated its first nuclear prototype. Zeno is tackling one of the hardest problems in energy. How do you power the places where nothing else works? The deep ocean, the Arctic, or even the lunar surface? Their answer is nuclear batteries, compact systems that turn nuclear waste into safe, long-lasting power. In this conversation, Tyler and I dive into Zeno's origin story, how nuclear batteries actually work, the frontier markets they're targeting, and his broader vision for how this technology could reshape operations from the seabed to space. Let's jump in. The future of space innovation takes off here. On September 17 at the Space Innovation Summit in Paris, alongside World Space Business Week, I'll be connecting with startups, investors, and tech pioneers who are pushing the boundaries of what's possible. You can join for the day on September 17 or experience the full World Space Business Week from September 15 to 19. From breakthrough technologies to bold new business models, it's where the next chapter of space begins. Don't miss it. Find details at WSBW.com or nova.space. Tyler, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Mo.
I should say, actually, welcome back to the show. But you were with us. You came onto the show back when this was called Pathfinder. Now we have a different name, Valley of Depth. But I think you had mentioned to me earlier, the first time you were with us was your first podcast.
It was, yeah. No, we were kind of quiet for the first handful of years, and that was the first podcast. I remember recorded it in Tri-Cities, Washington. We're doing some work in Central Washington with the DOE there. But no, been on a handful more since then. So hopefully a little more polished this time around.
Yeah, no, you did a great job then, but obviously a lot has changed. It's been a couple years, so. Why don't we, just for the benefit of the audience, maybe you could just kind of start from the beginning. So you're the co-founder and CEO of Zeno Power, founded it, if memory serves me correctly, in 2018. And while you were actually still at Vanderbilt. So tell us a little bit about the origin story, how you came to be. Are you a nuclear guy? Have you always been a nuclear guy? How did this all come together?
Yeah, not in the slightest. I was a computer science major. Thought I was going to go work at, Facebook, Amazon, Google, you name it. And the short story is my sophomore year, my friend and I wrote a paper on building a nuclear-powered airplane. And this was very much a school project of school projects looking at decarbonizing the aviation industry. And we ended up working with the professor at Vanderbilt to write this 25-page paper, which will never see the light of day again, on actually a thorium molten salt reactor-powered Boeing 777. In the course of doing this, we ended up getting in touch with a graduate student at Vanderbilt, a guy, Jake Matthews. And Jake was a West Point grad, did a couple tours in Afghanistan, was now getting his master's in mechanical engineering at Vanderbilt. And when at Vandy, he had written a similar paper, except instead of using a nuclear reactor, using a nuclear battery or radioisotope power system. And instead of powering a Boeing 777, powering a drone. So looking at a small box the size of a standard microwave oven that generates electricity for decades, utilizing radioisotope decay. Put this on an unmanned aerial vehicle, you could have this drone that could stay in the air for years at a time. And the three of us, with the support of Vanderbilt, started pursuing this concept. The long and the short is, after talking to a lot of people in the summer of 2018, we decided that we should probably just not mix drones that sometimes crash and nuclear batteries, but more broadly really stumbled upon the core thesis that became this foundation of Zeno, which was, in the wake of a new great power competition, the seabed, the Arctic, space, the surface of the moon were regions of growing contest and activity. And if we could build nuclear batteries, small boxes that generate electricity for decades in manners that they were affordable and lightweight and scalable, that could have a lot of broad usability in these environments. So a very kind of windy early days. Again, not what I thought I would be doing in my life, but it's been quite the adventure over the past 7 years.
So it sounds like Vanderbilt was pretty supportive of this kind of early on. Like, was that sort of typical of the school's culture to, students found companies and then they throw their support behind those ideas?
So it's funny. I would say that's actually been one of the big changes of Vanderbilt over the past, let's call it, decade. And when we were starting this back in 2018, the Vanderbilt, Entrepreneurship Innovation Center had actually just started. So I'd say it was kind of the early days when they were starting to do some outreach to undergrads and others. There's been a really rich history at the university of spinning out, graduate program research into companies, but more, supporting undergrads pursuing ideas. I'd say that was a little newer at the time, but you've seen a really great ecosystem develop. And, the Vanderbilt Endowment actually invested in our Series B, which was fun and kind of full circle to get the the alma mater into the round. But they were remarkably supportive early on, and certainly would not be here today without their early support.
Yeah. Well, I was also going to ask you, do you have any like kind of early influencers or key sort of mentors that helped guide and validate the early days of the business? But it sounds like this, Jake Matthews was a big piece of it. Was there anyone else out there that was just like really helpful in kind of validating the vision?
Oh, so many. Again, we started this knowing nothing. I was a software engineer. I wasn't even a software engineer. I was a computer science major, wanting to be a software engineer. Thought I was going to go into that industry. Dove into nuclear, dove into space, dove into aerospace and defense. Had to learn how Washington, D.C. operates and what appropriations are and what programs of records are. So, it was certainly an evolution. And we had a lot of amazing advisors early on. Jake was the first technical person that came in and really, brought the technical gravitas to start this company. Steve Cron was this professor, former deputy assistant secretary, who really supported us and said, you guys should pursue this. We ended up doing a Techstars program in Los Angeles. I ended up dropping out of Vanderbilt to go and pursue this program. And I remember this program was sponsored by NASA JPL and the Air Force. And I remember, sitting across from a person at JPL who had spent his entire career on radioisotope power systems. And he was saying how there's this growing demand for this technology, and the plutonium we have today doesn't serve that demand, and really said, there is this need for NASA. I remember moving to DC and our first meetings with stakeholders in the Department of Defense and people who kind of took us under their wing and showed us how to navigate the SBIR process. Later meeting Admiral John Richardson, former chief of naval operations, who's now on our board of directors, who really helped us navigate the Navy in the early days and provided a lot of that top cover. So, we would not be here today without the advisors, and I could speak for probably hours about the people who have supported us in the early days to not only validate the idea, but hold our hand as we're walking through these complex industries with really no institutional knowledge coming into them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so let's fast forward to today. Like, tell us where you raised about $70 million, right, since the start of the company. Obviously, a pretty large Series B. I think that was $50 million. Walk us through sort of the products you're building and sort of the status of each of them right now.
Yeah. So again, raised $70 million in private capital. Today, I've been awarded and executing on over $60 million of anchor contracts with the Department of Defense and NASA, and really broadly focusing on maritime and space markets. So when we look at our product lines, it's focused on power on the seabed, power in space, and that is both satellites on orbit, cislunar space on the surface of the moon and beyond. And the reason we're starting in those markets is because these are regions where there's a lot of growing operations. In the maritime sector, you're seeing billions of dollars investing into sensing and autonomy, yet you're missing this power layer. How are we going to operate in the ocean where batteries die quickly, solar doesn't work, grids don't exist? How are these sensors and autonomous systems going to operate reliably for years? As we start to see the increased need for mobility and resilience on orbit, as we're broadly back into a race to the moon, where when you're on the moon, you're in lightness for 2 weeks and darkness for 2 weeks. Again, these markets are really developing that we thought might develop when we started the company 7 years ago. And we're seeing this strong demand for persistent energy that can really be the foundation of those operations. So today, again, we have now built and demonstrated our first nuclear prototype, really proving this core technology works. We broadly secured our nuclear supply chain that is fueled. We've received from the Department of Energy, taken a waste product off their hands to repackage into fuel for these power systems. Then we have secured commercial radiological facilities to begin processing this fuel and building these systems. With these anchor DoD contracts and NASA contracts, next year in 2026, we'll build and demonstrate these first full-scale systems, and then charging ahead in 2027 to really begin delivering these operationally and at scale. This is to NASA, the Space Force, and the Navy, but also commercially in the sectors, mostly again in these maritime space environments in the near term.
That's great. That's a lot of progress since we last spoke. So
it's been a long 3 years, but yeah,
exactly. Well, all right, let's take a step back. There's a lot to unpack in what you just said, but I want to take a quick step back. For those unfamiliar, maybe talk to us a little bit about what is a nuclear battery? How does it work in layman terms? What makes it different from a conventional battery or a reactor? And then maybe give us a little bit of history, right? Because we have used nuclear batteries before for a lot of use cases. And some pretty phenomenally important use cases. Maybe let's start there.
No, that sounds great. So, nuclear batteries, known as radioisotope power systems as well, again, are small boxes roughly the size of a standard microwave oven. And in the middle, we have radioisotopes, which are just hot rocks that are naturally and passively decaying over decades. As they decay, they produce heat. you can convert this heat into electricity, and you get a small box that generates electricity for years at a time. So not fission. We have no uranium, no chain reactions, no neutrons that is splitting apart different materials. It's not traditional batteries in the sense that we are storing energy. We are generating electricity, but it is to simplify, in a lot of ways, a battery that lasts for 10 years. This box is constantly generating electricity for a decade. And as you mentioned, there's a rich history of this technology in the United States and internationally. First really developed in the late 50s and early 60s for space applications. Dozens of radioisotope power systems have flown in space before, powering spacecrafts that have gone to Pluto, Saturn, Mars. The Air Force and Navy have used these in the well to power maritime buoys and Arctic sensors. And historically, there's two flavors of this technologies that have been used, and that is radioisotope power systems that use either strontium-90 or plutonium-238 as fuel. And plutonium is what is traditionally and still used for space applications. It's a great isotope, long half-life, great thermal properties, it's easy to shield. It is also, unfortunately, one of the world's rarest, most expensive elements. So we're still producing in the US today, but we only produce enough to build one, maybe two of these power systems per decade. So right now, all the plutonium we're producing is being reserved for NASA's mission to Titan, Saturn's moon, in the 2027-2028 time period, when we're going to have a nuclear-powered quadcopter flying through Titan atmosphere. Incredible technology, but again, the limited amount of fuel just limits the use. Strontium-90, on the other hand, is a more available, abundant waste product. It is a byproduct from the nuclear fuel cycle. There is strontium-90 sitting around the United States, internationally separated, decaying away every day as a liability to the taxpayer and the Department of Energy. Because of that, over 1,000 strontium-90 nuclear batteries have been built before, but historically, these technologies have been very heavy because of the shielding that was needed around this material. Strontium-90, unlike plutonium, results in what is called Bremsstrahlung radiation. You get X-rays, you need concrete and lead, and it is more difficult to shield and therefore heavier. So we started this company, again, seeing first the market trends. Again, this core thesis that the seabed, Arctic space, we're going to have this need for reliable power. And that B, if we could build this technology in a manner that it was affordable and lightweight and scalable, that could have a lot of broad usability. So the first product line that we're bringing to market is around this material strontium-90, but with some novel heat source and energy conversion technologies that enables the use of this in more compact and lightweight packages. There's other isotopes we're intending to commercialize in the future as well. But again, this core thesis that if we can build this technology in a manner that it's affordable and lightweight and scalable, that can have a lot of broad usability for powering sensors on the seabed, to satellites in orbit, to landers and rovers on the moon.
So when we first talked about this, I remember you were telling me about how potentially, so you're kind of trying to give me this perspective on how radioactive strontium-90 was actually. And you gave me this example about, I don't remember it exactly, but you said something like if you put a piece of strontium-90 on a football field, like, I don't know if you recall and I don't remember all the details, but basically it's pretty radioactive and it's very dangerous, unshielded, right? So my point, what I'm getting at is, well, one, do you remember that analogy? Because I can't remember it, and it's bugging me. But two, like, how are you dealing with those characteristics of strontium-90 that are very dangerous?
Yeah, I mean, strontium-90, if unshielded, is dangerous, as is all radioactive material. But as with any radioactive material, if properly shielded, it is safe to handle and operate. So, the first nuclear prototype that we built at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, there's actually a photo of the technician in the lab that is holding it in his hand. And that's just kind of a, physical manifestation of the fact that if you properly shield this, if you encapsulate the material, that this is safe to handle. And again, there's a rich history of the use of this. Thousands that have been safely deployed in space terrestrially. And that is just given the fact that with the proper amount of shielding, the dose rate comes down, you meet the regulatory restrictions that we have, and this material can be safely used. And these are extremely robust devices. This technology has to withstand being on a rocket that blows up, on a satellite that falls out of the sky and hits the ground. Apollo 13, as it re-enters Earth's atmosphere, actually had a radioisotope power system on board that successfully withstand re-entry. So these are extremely robust devices that are designed to withstand really adverse environments that ensures the material is safely handled as we build them, but also the entire life cycle of the system as well.
So realistically, right, at least maybe not in the near future, it's not like you're going to have a nuclear powered battery on like a car or like a phone, right? It's just there's far more, efficient ways to, or I should say cheaper maybe not, I won't say efficient, to like power those types of technologies?
Yeah, well, look, the plutonium version of this technology was actually used in pacemakers in the 20th century. So they have been
Interesting.
used before. There is,
Yeah.
as battery technology advanced, there was a reason why we shifted away from that. But generally, that sentiment is correct. In the near term, we're really focused on these more strategic frontier environments where people are buying this because no other energy technology works, providing persistent energy for years at a time. We can enable brand new strategic value for government and commercial customers, and we get to capture a portion of that. Now, longer term, as we build out the company, scale our power up, price down, the broader vision is to still commercialize these in distributed energy markets for critical infrastructure, off-grid power, disaster relief scenarios. Now, is this going to be in a Tesla or a Lime scooter? Probably not. But we do see, future markets beyond just space and maritime markets as we build out the company and get to scale.
So all right, let's talk a little bit about sort of what the alternative is, right? So in these kind of remote, austere environments, what are the limitations of, solar panels, chemical batteries, diesel generators that nuclear batteries can overcome?
Yeah. I'll give kind of two examples focusing on the seabed and surface of the moon, two of the more extreme environments you can imagine. And the short answer is no other energy technology can provide years of persistent energy in these environments. On the seabed, traditional batteries die quickly. Fuel cells need refueling. Solar power doesn't work. There is some cabled infrastructure on the seabed, but that is very fixed and that is limited and expensive. If you want to have distributed systems, you can drop down on the seabed and operate for years at a time, whether that is supporting distributed sensors or recharging of autonomous undersea vehicles or supporting industries from deep sea mining to telecom to offshore energy generation. This is the only technology that can provide years of persistent distributed energy on the seabed. Now let's go to the surface of the moon. And when you're on the moon, you're generally in lightness for 14 days and then darkness for 2 weeks for 14 days. By the way, the moon orbits the Earth and Earth orbits the sun. The 2 weeks of darkness called the lunar night. And over the past handful of years, we've had numerous successful landings of U.S. commercial companies on the moon, Intuitive Machines, Firefly. But these were landers that were powered by solar power and batteries. Solar power and batteries works great during those 2 weeks of lightness. When you hit 2 weeks of darkness, it drops to negative 300 degrees. They freeze to death. So NASA paid these companies about $100 million each to land on the moon. They died after 2 weeks. Meanwhile, there is one country that is operating 24/7, 365 on the lunar surface, and that is China with their Chang'e 4 lander that is powered by plutonium. So if you want to survive the lunar night, if you want to operate for years, being able to explore in permanently shadowed regions, you need heat and electricity independent of the sun. Radioisotope power systems, nuclear batteries, they're the only proven way to do that. So again, those are two environments where if you want to have sustained, persistent operations, the only way to do it, and the only way it's been done historically, is through the use of this technology.
How much energy can one of these batteries actually produce? And are they modular? Can you stack a number of them together? And what does that look like? What do those use cases look like?
Yep, absolutely. In the near term, tens to hundreds of watts is kind of that sweet spot. In the future, ambitions going up into low kilowatts of electricity. So relatively small power when we're compared to fission reactors that are talking about megawatts. However, this is constant energy generation. And in most environments, we're actually just trickle charging a battery. So it's really just a duty cycle question of how much energy are we generating, how much is stored in the battery, and how much does the system that needs this energy need energy? And you just match that up and ensure that there is always energy to be pulled for the system. But because of that, we're not looking at powering massive infrastructure on the seabed, in the Arctic, on the surface of the moon. We're looking at powering distributed sensors, autonomous undersea vehicles, seabed cable repeaters. We're looking at powering small satellites, landers and rovers on the moon, deep space probes and spacecrafts. So again, more, I would say, platforms than infrastructure just because of that power level. But again, that is where we're seeing massive investment right now as you look at autonomy in the maritime sector, the Golden Dome and resilient distributed assets, landers and rovers on the moon. You're seeing this growing need for autonomous platforms in these environments that are limited by power, and we can really unleash these platforms in these domains.
So you alluded to this earlier. So tell us a little bit about your kind of initial customers. Obviously, there's a number of DoD contracts in there, but tell us a little bit about what the work you're doing to the extent you can share with the DoD, and then anything on the commercial side.
Yeah, so we have 3 real anchor programs with the Department of Defense and NASA. The DoD programs that are focused on power on the seabed, so powering things on the seabed, and can't get into much more detail than that. With the Space Force focused on really increasing the mobility and resiliency of satellites, looking at Golden Dome operations where you want to have satellites that are not just reliant on solar power to increase the resiliency and in some opportunities mobility. And the third program with NASA is really focused on power on the lunar surface. So this is, again, ensuring that landers on the lunar surface can operate for years instead of days, that rovers can go into permanently shadowed regions, mineral-rich regions where there's ice and other things that we want and are going to be crucial for future lunar operations there. So again, in the near term, really focusing on the government and with Navy, Space Force, and NASA. Now, what these contracts are also enabling us to do is by 2026, actually build and demonstrate these first full-scale maritime and space systems. And then, great name for the podcast, from there really cross this valley of death into these production contracts. And this is looking to sell at scale to the government. So making the bridge from the R&D programs into production contracts, whether it is through traditional programs of record or a lot of the innovation programs that are coming up, but also begin to sell commercially. And commercially, this is in some opportunities to people that are selling back to the government, whether this is Blue Origin, Intuitive Machines, or Anduril, but also beginning to sell into commercial industries in these environments, whether it is the telecom industry, subsea, deep sea mining industry, or pure commercial ambitions in the space environment as well.
And when you're thinking about the model today versus maybe what it looks like in the future, are you selling these units outright? Are you thinking of offering sort of power as a service? What does the model look like?
Yeah, I'd say looking at kind of three business models, looking at, selling them directly, power as a service, and what I would call revenue sharing, more enabling brand new things. So mostly for the government, the interest has been direct sales. They buy the power system, they get to deploy it, they get to have these operations that are sustained for a decade. For a lot of commercial conversations we've been having, there is interest in more of this power as a service, where people can pay to recharge your AUVs on the seabed. They can pay to survive the lunar night on the surface of the moon. So more looking again at that service where we're providing longevity in these environments. And the third one I'd say is revenue sharing. Again, what's really nice about these near-term markets is we are capability enabling. We are allowing customers, whether it's in the commercial or government sector, to do new things they can't do today. As they do that, they generate new value, and we then can potentially capture a portion of that. So let's look at some of these people that are operating on the lunar surface, the companies that are going to be delivering payloads to the lunar surface. We could look at joint opportunities where we can together be selling survive the lunar night or extended durations on the lunar surface and then share some of that revenue as well. So I'd say there's a lot of flexibility, in the near term, really focusing on the government, focusing on those direct sales, but especially as we sit commercially, there are some creative opportunities to get more, recurring and sustained revenue.
How do you, just general kind of electricity energy pricing question, like how do you think about pricing kind of multi-year power in a box, right? It's like here like versus like, what you would do in diesel or, solar battery systems. Like, how do you think about pricing a technology like that?
Yeah, not to kind of just be repetitive in what, I've been saying, but it's, no one is buying this because they're $1 per kilowatt hour. In the near term, we are expensive energy. They're not buying this because we can provide energy for this price over the next 10 years. They're buying it because we enable brand new things. Let's go back to the moon. NASA is paying Intuitive Machines to land on the moon, survive for 14 days for $100 million. How much more will NASA or other companies pay to be able to operate for 5 years instead of 14 days? We then get to price in the value of that, and that's the price of the power system that we're developing. Let's go to the maritime sector, where you have the deep sea mining industry that wants to operate, in the remote regions in the Pacific. And right now, they need to bring out infrastructure to support their AUVs. They need to frequently replace the sensors on subsea. If you can have this fixed infrastructure that allows them to operate autonomously, you're massively reducing the logistics. You're massively reducing the overhead of that, and then we get to kind of capture a portion of those reduced savings and the capability that's enabled. So I'd say it's totally different than fission companies that are selling power to data centers where they have competition. They have to show that this is a better technology than natural gas or solar or any other source of energy generation. We are enabling new things, and the value of what we're enabling is ultimately where the price of our system comes in.
Let's talk about regulatory or the regulatory hurdles you may or may not have. What do those look like? I mean, most nuclear related startups that we've talked to so far, not counting fusion, their biggest hurdle tends to be regulatory. So has that, what is that? What do those pathways look like for batteries?
Yeah, I'll say, there's certainly a before and after over, President Trump's executive orders earlier this year as well, where you're seeing, some really incredible initiatives that are looking at streamlining regulatory authorities for the deployment of fission in a lot of places. That has trickled down to what we're doing. But, beyond that, we are in a very different regulatory environment in the fission world. Again, we don't have uranium, we don't have fission, we don't have chain reactions. We have hot rocks, byproduct material that is passively decaying over decades. And because of that, it's in a very different regulatory environment, generally called byproduct material licensing. And this is the same way that, for example, hospitals are licensed when they have isotopes for cancer treatments. There's 20,000 of these licenses issued around the United States. Generally, we are talking about timelines on the order of months instead of the order of years. And because of that, it is a much more streamlined, straightforward regulatory process. And that is for being able to handle the material and build these systems. Now, where there is some novelty is in actually deploying them. In the maritime sector, again, it is relatively established and straightforward, working through byproduct material licensing, working with the government. They have certain authorities as well, where there's actually the most interesting regulatory cases for launching these into space. And in 2019, there was a president's memorandum called NSPM 20 that overhauled the launch approval process for spacecrafts with nuclear power systems. And this memorandum did a few things. First, it broke down launches into tiers based off of risk levels. And second, it opened up a very clear commercial pathway to the FAA to launch nuclear power systems into space. So we are now engaged with the FAA and multiple other regulators working through this new process to launch nuclear power systems into space under this streamlined authority. And again, targeting these first launches in 2027, both for national security and commercial endeavors in that time period. So again, as a whole, very different regulatory environment. In general, much more streamlined. Having said that, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on in the fission world as well, following President Trump's executive orders and a lot of the pretty incredible things that can come out of the Department of Energy and the NRC.
So I know it's not as directly impacting you as a fission reactor business, but I am just kind of curious to get your perspective. What do you think the future of, with these executive orders, which is a good step forward? I mean, I've heard lots of opinions from this is great, exactly what we want to see, to like, hey, this is more bark than it is bite. Like, what do you expect from the regulatory side of kind of nuclear in America over the next, let's just say, couple of years, next 1 to 2 years? Do you see meaningful change coming out of the NRC?
This is probably an oversimplification. But I think one of the biggest differences is that, historically, and this is not a statement on the NRC or DOE or any group individually, but, I think that we have felt and the industry has felt with a lot of engagement with the government was frequently trying to get to know. No was a default answer, and you had to convince them to get the yes, whether it was the license or the use of this technology. I think generally across the board, you're just seeing this get to yes mentality. You're seeing a willing partner in the government, whether that is in DOE or NRC, to work through these issues with you. Now, again, the government still has a massive responsibility to ensure the safe use and deployment of nuclear technologies. This is an industry where one accident will kill the entire industry. So it is crucial for everybody to ensure that there are strict regulations for a reason. They're exactly the strictness they need to be, but not, overly cumbersome. But again, I think across the board, you're seeing this just get to yes mentality. This is at DOE, this is at the NRC, this is at the White House, this is at the Department of Defense. And this is just resulting in massive tailwinds that is also unlocking a lot of private capital. I think you're seeing the trickle-down effects there. We're seeing a lot of investors that might have been scared off of nuclear before because of the regulatory environment. A lot of these headwinds that you were getting from the government. Now that that's converted to tailwinds, I think you're seeing that trickle down to investors as well, that is creating this just unbelievable ecosystem for nuclear innovation that I think is incredibly exciting over the next handful of years and hopefully coming decades as well.
That's great. Well, okay, let's talk a little bit about competition. So you mentioned earlier that we've had, I think you mentioned 1,000 plus nuclear batteries that have been built and made and used operationally, and correct me if I'm wrong if I'm not remembering that correctly, but what does the competitive landscape look like in the nuclear battery space right now? Like, who are you competing with?
Yeah, so internationally over 1,000, the US we're more on the 200 to 300 order. But I'd say that in a lot of ways you're seeing a similar shift of where traditionally government-led programs, you're now seeing a really commercial ecosystem developing. you're seeing the same thing here. This is no different than what we're seeing in the fission world, no different than we saw in the launch vehicle space over the past 20 years. So we're certainly starting to see competition, and this is within some of the large nuclear groups in the United States. This is some other startups in the United States, internationally as well. Both we're seeing other government entities and startups internationally, get into this space. And for us, that's that's exciting. When we started this in 2018, that was not the case. Nobody knew this technology. This was not a place where we were seeing startups or even the large nuclear companies really invest. And I think a big reason for that is at the time, the markets that are here today didn't exist. And that was this thesis that we had when we started the company, was that you were going to see the growing need for sensing and autonomy in the maritime sector. We were going to go back to the moon. We were going to see distributed constellations on orbit that need sun-independent power. Today, I think that these markets are becoming a lot more obvious, and that is, of course, now resulting in more competition. So we're excited to see that. I think it validates the market in a lot of ways. Now, what we believe differentiates us is in a lot of ways the fact that we've been working at this for a while. And because of that, we have built nuclear hardware. We have secured our nuclear supply chains, fuel, and facilities. We are far down the regulatory approvals needed to not just handle and build these systems, but deploy them as well. And we have contracts with key government stakeholders and key commercial partnerships as well to build these systems next year in 2026, and immediately afterwards in 27 start deploying them and getting to scale immediately. And we believe that does give us a unique position in the ecosystem. And not only our timeline to build and develop and deploy these first systems, but our timeline to deploy dozens of these per year because of the years of investment we've been working on and building in here.
So I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, which was the point around turning nuclear waste into valuable power, right? And a lot of the power generation startups in the nuclear space are dealing with sort of the realities of the fuel supply chain, particularly HALEU, high assay, low enriched uranium, and like where they're going to get it. And there's obviously a lot of great movement around other companies that are trying to fill those gaps. But obviously you don't have to deal with that, since you're taking basically waste and turning that into power. But how much of that supply is out there? Is that a potential risk? And how important is that? How big of an advantage is it to be able to kind of utilize that type of supply chain in order to power your batteries?
No, absolutely. And I mean, when we started the company, we chose strontium-90 as the isotope we're using because there is a lot of it in the world. Is it the single best isotope to use to build nuclear batteries? You can have a debate on that. There's other ones that have different characteristics that are better. We chose this because there's a lot of it. So, today we have our first source of material. This is a old box of strontium-90 that had been sitting in Tennessee since the 1980s. We had a public-private partnership with DOE a couple years ago to, recycle this material and take what was the largest source of radioactivity on the Oak Ridge site, take it off-site, process the fuel, build these first 40 heat sources, and deliver these first full-scale systems. And this is really setting the pathway for how we'll do this more at scale. And there's other large quantities of separated strontium-90 sitting around the United States, sitting internationally, enough for us to build thousands of heat sources in the coming years. So again, the reason we're using this is because this is an isotope with a supply chain that is available to scale. Now, there still is a finite amount of strontium-90 out there. This is a great problem for us to have, and if and when we're successful. And that's where we're actually really encouraging to see a lot of the recycling initiatives you're seeing come out of DOE and the White House right now. As we look at potentially recycling used nuclear fuel, there are unbelievable amounts of strontium-90 in there. Other isotopes as well that are interesting for nuclear batteries, but also for other industrial and medical purposes. So we're engaged now with a lot of the players in that space to try to build the economic case that if you're going to recycle used nuclear fuel, yes, the primary reason to do that is to get uranium and bring it back into the fuel cycle for reactors. But if you're recycling it, there's a lot of other valuable material in there that can help close the economic case for doing this and ensure that we're utilizing even more of this waste product and collectively building this amazing win-win case of using what is this waste product, the liability to support a wide set of national security, scientific, and commercial endeavors.
So while I have you, and I don't know if it's fair for me to call you a nuclear waste expert, but we have a lot of, there's a lot, I want to talk a little bit about the nuclear waste issue here in the US, particularly that right now, unless there's news that I missed, all of the nuclear waste we have are in storage containers, and none of it has been really been disposed of. And of course, there's the drama behind Yucca Mountain and potentially using that as a source, and that's been a whole political kind of mess. But what do you think what do you think the future of nuclear kind of waste disposal, storage and disposal look like? Do you have any kind of views on that?
Yeah, and I can kind of give a top level overview of that and then, dig into some of my views. But, generally there are, and this is an oversimplification, but two types of nuclear fuel cycles. You have once-through fuel cycles and closed fuel cycles. And in the United States, we have a once-through fuel cycle. We put uranium in a reactor, we burn it up so only about 5% of the uranium is fissioned. We take what is now what we call waste, which has massive amounts of uranium and other isotopes that have been produced as we burned up the uranium. We stick it in canisters on site at reactors, and it just sits there. Now, there are a lot of questions about the safety of having, nuclear waste sit at these sites. That's frequently a political talking point that you'll see people say, I'm not supportive of nuclear because of the nuclear waste issue. And let's be clear, the way we handle nuclear waste today is very safe. These canisters are sitting there. There's photos of people standing by them. They're extremely, again, robust devices. It's a relatively small amount of material. If you look at all of the quote unquote nuclear waste we have in the country, it's something like it's in on the football field the size of a building that's 2 or 3 stories high. It's a small amount of material. And there were efforts, as you mentioned, in the 2000s to, put all of this at Yucca Mountain. This would be our national repository where we would put the waste that was, officially canceled in Trump 1 administration. And today that's completely dead. Let's compare that to France. France is what they have a closed nuclear fuel cycle. This is where they put their fuel in reactors, they burn it up, they ship it to primarily a site called Le Hague. At Le Hague, they process all of it. They get the fuel that's been recycled, they put it back in reactors. They're able to utilize some of the waste products for other purposes, and the material that they can't use, they vitrify, put in glass, and they safely store it away. And that is a much more sustainable model, for the broader use of what we call nuclear waste, because again, it is not waste. There historically have been some proliferation concerns with that. As you process this used nuclear fuel, you frequently have to separate plutonium, and that has been a concern for proliferation. That's one of the reasons why there have been, headwinds in the U.S. to do that. All that background to say is, we're seeing some really exciting movement in the United States to look at recycling. This was mentioned in President Trump's executive orders earlier this year. You're seeing startups that are specifically looking at this, such as Curio. You're seeing larger companies such as Oklo that are diving in as well. You're seeing some of these companies actually start to get small amounts of nuclear waste and look over the next few years to do some processing to demonstrate this. Shine, another company that is looking at this. So you're seeing, not only the industrial base start to develop, but support in Washington, D.C. for this in a bipartisan manner, which is quite exciting. Again, it is more sustainable to have this closed fuel cycle. It also unlocks a lot of valuable material, not only for advanced reactors, but for companies like ours, for the medical isotope industry, and the industrial isotope industry as well.
I appreciate you indulging me on that, but that was a great overview, so I appreciate it. All right, so let's jump back to Zeno. Tell me, okay, so before you deliver your first commercial battery to a customer, what are sort of the biggest technical risks that you're still actively de-risking? And I think the date I had heard was 2027.
2026 is when we'll, build and demonstrate the first full-scale systems. 27 actually operationally deploy them.
Yep. Okay.
And I'll start off when we look at the technical risks. For the most part, this is a proven technology, right? We have built and deployed these on the seabed, in space, the surface of the moon, and beyond. We built strontium-90 systems. So the core physics of what we're doing are not necessarily new. Where we have some technical advancements are on the heat source design that allows us to reduce what is called this Bremsstrahlung radiation to allow us to use slightly less shielding and have more compact heat sources, and also on the energy conversion. So historically, when this technology has been built, we have always used what are called thermoelectric generators to convert the heat into electricity. These are solid state devices, 0 moving pieces, TRL9 to convert heat into electricity. The challenge is you only get about 5% conversion of that heat into electricity. Because of that, under contracts we have with both the Department of Defense and NASA, we're maturing a Stirling engine to convert this heat into electricity. A Stirling engine, you're now introducing a moving piece, more technology development needed, sitting at TRL 5 to 6. The benefit is you can get upwards of 25, even 30% conversion of this heat into electricity if and when this works. So if we look at the technical risks that we have now through next year, it really is getting the supply chain developed and our manufacturing footprint developed to build these heat sources at scale. It is de-risking the Stirling technology. And thus far, we have built and demonstrated our first single heat source. We need to get the infrastructure in place to start to build these more at scale. We've demonstrated some electrically heated systems of the energy conversion. Again, next year in 26 is really bringing it all together to build and demonstrate these first scale systems, and then in 2027 start deploying them. Now, when we looked at Zeno's risk profile as a whole, there's a lot of amazing technology development we've done and still need to do, but I would say the technology risk is relatively low, especially when you compare to fission and certainly fusion companies. Where our risk more is the small risk embedded in a lot of places. Yes, the little bit of technology risk combined with the supply chain risk, combined with the manufacturing risk and the regulatory risk and how we actually deploy these and integrate into architectures. And that's where from day one, we really recognize that we have to build up excellency in all of those areas, from engineering to regulatory to supply chain to business development to government relations, to ensure that we're driving down risks in those areas to enable us to not just build this first system in 26, not just deploy the first one in 27, but as soon as we can build them at scale to serve a wide set of customer needs.
So this Stirling generator, is there once this is working, is there a model where you can sell that generator to have more efficient sort of thermal to electricity like conversion? Like, is there another customer base for that, out of curiosity?
Sure. So we're working with a partner on that. We're not actually maturing the Stirling engine ourselves. We're more focused on the broader integration of the Stirling with the heat sources to build these radioisotope Stirling generators, these more efficient forms of nuclear batteries. But certainly Stirling is a technology that is looked at used for some of the smaller reactors. For a lot of the NASA work focused on fission reactors, some companies were looking at Stirling, others focus on what's called a Brayton cycle. You're seeing that industry shift more towards Brayton, especially with NASA's announcement for a 2030 fission reactor that must use a Brayton cycle. But there is some very interesting uses of Stirling beyond just this. But again, we're more focused on the broader integration of that, with these radioisotope heat sources to build these more efficient power systems and nuclear batteries.
So I know you alluded to this earlier, but tell me a little bit about the testing infrastructure that you've developed for all of these for the batteries.
Yeah. So, right now we're partnering with Westinghouse Electric Company and utilizing their commercial facility in Pennsylvania to begin processing the fuel and building these systems. And we need what are called hot cells. And hot cells are shielded boxes, concrete, where you have manipulators on the outside that have little claws on the inside of these hot cells to handle and process the nuclear fuel. So we're partnering with Westinghouse to use these existing radiological facilities that are licensed for the fuel. That is where the strontium-90 that we have today is currently sitting, and where we'll begin the next year in 2026 building and demonstrating these first full-scale systems. In the future, we certainly intend to build out our own infrastructure as well, in a variety of ways of looking at old infrastructure sitting around the U.S. that we can invest in, looking at really building a facility from the ground up to build up this nuclear battery factory where we can really build these at full scale. But we're very fortunate to be partnering with Westinghouse today using this existing infrastructure, which allows us to very quickly build, demonstrate, deploy these first systems while we build out this own pipeline and infrastructure for how we really scale up manufacturing. And we should have some exciting announcements on that soon that can keep you updated on.
What keeps you up at night?
Our ability to execute. And that's not because I'm not confident in our ability to do so. I'm more than confident in our ability to do so. But this is a massive shift compared to a handful of years ago. When we talked 3 years ago, we hadn't received fuel from the Department of Energy. We had some early stage R&D contracts, but we didn't see where this is going to transition to real production contracts with programs of record. We hadn't secured this facility at Westinghouse. We were very early in the regulatory process. We sit here today where we've proven this core technology works. We have secured this nuclear supply chain. We have customers, government and commercial that want this technology. We have the government that has come in and streamlined a lot of the acquisition authorities and regulatory approvals. It is on our team right now to execute. Now, that is an incredible place to be in. I love controlling our own destiny a lot more than relying on external things that have to happen. But that means that we need to continue to invest in our team, motivate our team, ensure that we have enough procedures so people can operate, but not too much that it's cumbersome, so that we can move with haste next year, build and demonstrate these first systems, 2027 deploy and scale on the back end. And in that scaling, I would say, is the biggest challenge that we have ahead. We're on a really good path to building and deploying these first systems, and then on the back end, delivering them operationally to our customers. where and how we build these at scale, that is a risk that we have remaining. But again, I am very confident in our team to knock down those, or work through those hurdles and continue to build a company.
Got it. Okay. Well, and by the way, I tend to agree with a lot of what you've said. It's just there's a lot of common truth in it because, like, when you start a company, that first year when you're still startup phase and maybe you've raised a little bit of money, and at the end of the day, like if you for whatever reason doesn't work out kind of early on, you are, it's like, hey, that was great. We tried, it didn't work out. Fine. But once you've gotten a certain level of execution behind you, a certain level of traction, a certain level of team building behind you, or then you start to say, well, there's a lot to lose now. You have real contracts, you have real technology, and the anxiety and the stress goes up. And it's this kind of weird thing as a founder where, like, you think as you get more and more milestones, as you build more of the business, you should feel less stress, but actually the stress just exponentially increases. So I feel that.
Look, we have 70, 75 people who are now a part of the company, many who moved their families, took their kids out of school and away from their friends to move to Seattle and Washington, D.C. to devote years of their life to the company. That's a lot of responsibility. Now, that's an amazing place to be. And, I'd say we are very fortunate the commitment the team is given. But to your point, that adds stress. That makes things more complicated. People are the best thing in the world. It also is, people problems start to take up more time than it did when you were 3 people. Now, in some ways, I like to think that, early on, we were frequently one punch away from being knocked out. That's not the case today. We have a lot more stability. So I would say I sleep better at night because of that. But the overall, pressure and stress certainly goes up. But, I personally find that more motivating. And if I look at what is the primary motivation today, what is most fulfilling about the work we're doing, first and foremost, I wholeheartedly believe in our vision. The ability to take what is a waste product and recycle it to support national security, space exploration, ensure that the United States is the leader in these frontier environments from the seabed to the Arctic to the surface of the moon and beyond. That motivates me deeply, and I know that does for the team as well. But honestly, the biggest motivation, the biggest source of fulfillment is the team. Walking through the office, seeing how much people really enjoy working at Zeno or bought into the mission. That is extremely motivating, and I would say is yes, while there's great responsibility and pressure with that, it's remarkably fulfilling as well.
Are you optimistic about the future of energy in the U.S.?
Very much so. And I'll kind of expand that to, energy and nuclear energy, but also aerospace and defense and broadly space, a lot of the industries that you're working in. And it's really because of that sentiment that I mentioned before. Capital is flowing into these industries. Regulatory hurdles are being torn down. You're seeing the Department of Defense not just be a good place for R&D funding, but actually buying this technology, whether it's the $151 billion Golden Dome, the executive orders that are getting rid of the requirement of resources process that is cumbersome to streamlining for startups to get in. In a lot of these industries, it was basically impossible for startups to work even a decade ago. And that is why what companies like SpaceX did was so unbelievably miraculous. Today, there is a real opportunity for a startup commercial innovation ecosystem in these sectors. And I am very bullish and excited on what that will lead to. And that is ultimately what gives me the optimism, is that there is this ecosystem that exists where the money is in, government is supportive, barriers are down. It's on industry to execute and deliver on the promises that we've all made. And that makes me incredibly bullish and excited about the future of not just energy, but also the broader aerospace, defense tech, and space tech industries.
So I know the last time we sat down together was 2 to 3 years ago. When we sit down again in, let's just say, 20 years, what do you hope Zeno's legacy is going to be?
Yeah, first and foremost, that we are an enabler of frontier distributed operations. That these environments, they are relatively, barren of persistent energy and operations, whether that's autonomy in the seabed, again, the Arctic, space, the surface of the moon, that we have robust economies in the maritime sector, that we have humans that are living on the moon, and at the foundation of all those operations are nuclear power and nuclear batteries. But beyond that, we do look at nuclear batteries being the tip of the iceberg of what this company can become. When we look at the infrastructure that they're building out, opportunities to expand into other industries from medical isotopes and the fuel processing, when we look at opportunities to expand and support the fission industry in these environments as well, we want to build one of the defining nuclear energy companies, nuclear technology companies of the 21st century. Starting with nuclear batteries, this relatively capital efficient, fast to market way to build up in relatively price insensitive markets, but allow that to really begin this, this engine to expand and grow from there to, build a really robust and large and again, defining nuclear company.
Well said. Tyler, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Mo. Appreciate it. And looking forward to talking again in 3 years.
Yeah, exactly. It was great to have you, and really appreciate the time as always. And good luck with everything. It sounds like you guys are really crushing it over there. So looking forward to continuing to root for your success.
Appreciate it, Mo. Thanks a bunch.
Okay, till next time.